Everybody knows Fnatic, the best team in the world. They are 8-0 on Lotus in the regular season. They went 3-0 on Lotus during Masters Tokyo. And they went 1-1 on Lotus at Lock-In. Their only loss was to Loud. They ended up winning that series anyway, but this is the only time they've ever lost, and it was to the Viper Harbor comp. Basically, in my opinion, any discussion about strategy in Valorant has to start in two places. Number one being the map that's being played, and number two, the comp that's being played on that map. So let's start with the map. Lotus is a map that, when it was released, was probably the most side imbalanced map ever. If we pull up the lock-in stats, let's go ahead and just do that for fun. It's 60% attack-sided win rate, 40% defense-sided win rate. So very clearly super imbalanced at this point. This is evened off a bit, but that's just because teams are sort of like compensating for the fact that the map is so attacker-sided. We look at the map. There's 3 sites. Right off the bat, 3 sites means it is much harder for the defenders to defend because they have to spread the resources more. There's multiple attack lanes for the attackers to, come into the site. There's on A site, we've got 2 different ways to get to the A site. On B, there's, kind of like 3 different ways to get into the B site. On C, we have this one main choke, but technically you could, I guess, come through B. But more importantly than that, C has the ability to rotate very quickly into B site. So there's a lot of options for the attackers. Raze is playing outside on C mound. They realize that they're not going to be able to make it through the C choke point, right? They can't go this way. So instead, they are just going to immediately pivot through the door, and they're going to hit the B site. Faster rotations for the attackers, more options for the attackers, 3 sites to defend. Just makes it super difficult for the defenders to shut down things. And on top of that, if we're talking about the further imbalances of the map, the A side of the map requires a lot of resources and like heavy commitment from the defenders to shut it down, because there's a single choke point, which we can circle right here. This is like the single choke point that can really be stopped, where the attackers can really be stopped with their progress. But since attackers spawn on that choke point, they're basically through the choke point instantly as soon as the round starts. There's really no time for the defenders to shut down the attackers. And once the attackers are out here, once you have control of this area and you have the ability to come up here and open the door, you can break this door over here, and you just have so many options. It just becomes a nightmare for the defenders to deal with. So essentially, they have to hard commit. They have to usually commit 3, even 4 potential players to the A site to shut down this choke. And that means that the rest of the map is going to be super weak because there's just no players there, and utility is being used super early on in the round. So essentially, the attack that is both flexible and rapidly adaptive gives them a huge amount of power to manipulate the defense into overcommitting. And then they can kind of like cut back through a door into vacated space and just fully manipulate what the defense is doing and easily get onto sites with very little resistance. So one of the inherent problems that defenders have to solve is this A site. As I said, there's a single choke there, and it gets bypassed very, very quickly. So generally speaking, we're going to see this massive utility dump right at the very beginning of the rounds. And it leads to a super imbalanced approach to the map in general. The map is going to tend to lead into agent compositions. So, based on what you see on the map, you're going to see different agents sort of try to fill the problems or fix the problems that the map presents. So that's one of the reasons why we see an agent like Neon a lot on this map, because Neon has the sprint ability. So you can be here initially, throw your stun to try and stop people coming out of the choke point, and then you can immediately run over to the C site to make C site strong. So that's one of the many variations of ways that teams are dealing with this. Another thing that we'll see a Raze, we'll see a Fade, we'll see, a Viper. We'll see all 3 of these stacked up, for example, and the Viper will throw a snake bite here, the Raze will throw a nade right here, and the Fade will throw an eye somewhere like this. And so all three of these agents will throw their utility, and then the Viper will like run over to C site or run over to B site to try and reinforce. But again, it's a very imbalanced way to play the map, but it also seems to be kind of like necessary if you actually want to play the map correctly. This is a great opportunity to just go ahead and talk about the comp. So agent composition, Fnatic's comp is suited perfectly to playing Lotus in a way that's directly opposed to how basically every other team is approaching the map. And they debuted this comp at Lock-In. We can go see that here is Lock-In. So Fnatic brought out this comp, which was the KJ, the Viper, the Astra, the Raze, and the Fade. None of these agents is particularly surprising because, I mean, Killjoy's good in the meta, Viper's good in the meta, Astra is pretty good in the meta, Raze is very good in the meta. Fade has kind of fallen off a little bit, but still definitely useful in certain maps. So it's like, it's not like they're playing a Yoru or like a Phoenix or a Reyna or something like that. All these agents are being played across a variety of maps, so they're all like decent agents, at least at a reasonable power level. We can see the Astra column right here, and there's only 2 dots on it. That's because Fnatic played Astra and 100 Thieves played Astra. Nobody else played Astra. Let's go to the EMEA League, go to agents. Lotus most played map, actually, 30 times across the entire league. Only 1 team played Astra, and that was Fnatic, who won the map 8 times. They went 8-0 on the map, and they had a 73% win rate on the attack side. 73%. We can go ahead and sort this. So here's Lotus, say 8-0, 73% win rate on the attack side, 53% on the defense. So both of those numbers are well above average on this map. If we look at Masters Tokyo, we can see that Fnatic, once again, undefeated on the map, 3-0. It was tied for their most picked map at the event. And here is something kind of interesting. So 57% on the attack side, still pretty darn good. You know, anytime you're above like 52% on a side, it's really good. But 88% win rate on the defensive side. Only 3 total rounds were lost on the defensive side. 3. In 3 full games, they lost 3 rounds on the defensive side. So very, very dominant. And once again, they were the only team playing their comp, and they were the only team running Astra on Lotus for the entire event of Masters Tokyo. So again, I'm not saying that Astra is the reason their comp is great, but I do think that there is something there, and it's something that we're going to talk about as we get into the actual game plan on the map, because this is where things get really interesting. And to understand how Fnatic thinks about Lotus and what they're doing with their comp, we need to understand how they think about the game. And we can kind of get a bit of how they think about the game directly from their strategic consultant, which is Anders. And he has publicly stated that he basically created the playbook for Lotus for Fnatic. Anders, in particular, likes to look at the game through the lens of a playstyle triangle relationship that is taken from card games such as Magic the Gathering. And this is the aggro, mid-range, and control relationship, where aggro basically outpaces control. So aggro beats control. Mid-range outlasts and out-adapts aggro and beats them in a game of attrition of resources and utility. And control basically plays like what's called a permission game, where they eventually can kind of go over the top of mid-range by essentially denying their flexibility and forcing them to kind of conform to what the control approach wants their opponents to do. It also might help to kind of translate this concept into Valorant terms. So if we're talking about aggro, we can kind of relate it to dive-oriented explosive agent compositions that rapidly take space and overwhelm a site. So double duelist with a breach, for example, very, very explosive. Or another good example is your average ranked composition with Jet, Raze, and Reyna being picked in every single game. Mid-range can be seen as kind of a mid-round focused team or agent composition that feels out the round through utility and positioning, and then kind of forces their opponents to use their own utility and bodies in response to that, to re-clear areas of the map, or simply just kind of like counter what seems like pressure. And then control is a little bit harder to kind of give a one-to-one comparison from this like trading card game model to Valorant, but I would say it's more of like a space denial through lots of layers of utility, lots of passive information, think like Cypher trips and cams, Killjoy utility, chamber trip, Lots of smokes, lots of slows, lots of information gathering tools so that you can basically like win the information game and really drag out the rounds and force the other team to kind of like slow their roll, not get a lot of value out of taking early map control, that kind of stuff. The next question is, how does this game theory apply to Lotus? Lotus as a map tends to favor attacker-sided comps, and it tends to favor kind of like fast, explosive play, at least seemingly. The fact that it is so attacker-sided and the fact that this fight for A main seems to require so much sort of like commitment to deal with has led a lot of teams to favor very explosive and aggressive comps so that they can just like aggressively fight for this space. It's also safe to assume that a map that favors attackers should be easy to exploit with a composition that attacks well. So it's like if the map is already attacker sided with sort of in a vacuum, then when you put attack sided agents into that, you should have sort of like an exponential exploitation of that weakness of the map. So for example, if you wanted to have a really good attack side on Lotus and completely disregard the defensive side, we can take into account that this is an attack sided map, and then we can maybe throw out a composition that is like maybe, yeah, sure, let's do Reyna, Raze, Jet, we'll say Brimstone, and maybe like a KO, because all these agents are very, very aggressive focused. They all have just kind of like go forward utility and not a whole lot of anything else. So this composition may be incredibly good at attack. Probably going to suck at defense, but it might be like the most exploitive comp of the attack side. But if we are looking at this from the perspective of Fnatic, who seems to buy into this stylistic triangle theory, then we can assume that a comp that's like mid-range would be maybe a good matchup for these teams that are trying to play more of like a aggro style, right? You know, using this theory that their strategic coach has expressed believing in, and shown data that may even back that up, the mid-range comp should beat the aggro comp. And since most teams are running aggro, maybe mid-range is the answer to the current meta on Lotus. One thing that you'll notice about all these agents is that almost all of them, outside of Raze, have rechargeable, reusable, or reclaimable utility. Okay, and that is a very, very key point to remember about how Fnatic is playing this game and how they think about kind of like beating the aggro style with this mid-range style. So obviously Astra has the ability to place stars, right? You can place a star, you can recall it into a nebula, which is a 3-second smoke, 2-second smoke, and then you keep that star. So you can still take space with the nebula without actually using any of your utility. And you can kind of cycle utility for a long time with Astra, and you can place utility all across the map to do a lot of different things. Fade as a rechargeable piece of utility. Haunt, obviously, on a cooldown that's fairly long, but it does recharge. And then in addition to that, you have 2 Prowlers, so quite a bit of utility coming out from Fade, right? Astra has 4 stars. So that's a lot of utility. Lots of options. Raze, not the most. I mean, sure, you can earn another nade, but whatever. Sometimes you just need a duelist to do stuff. But then we look at Viper, right? Poison Cloud. You can throw it. You can pick it up. Once it's on the ground, you can put the smoke up. You can take the smoke down. You can put the smoke back up. You can take the smoke down. Lots of options with this orb. Add the toxic screen in there. Again, up, down, up, down, up, down. You can't pick it back up, but you can constantly smoke and re-smoke areas of the map, which is very, very good for conditioning and creating pressure. Then you've got 2 mollies on top of this. So again, tons of utility coming out from Viper. Killjoy, we've got the ability to place a turret that not only recharges, but can also be reclaimed. Same with Alarmbot, can be put down, picked back up, and also 2 mollies as well. So this is a very large amount of utility that Fnatic's comp has access to. The main thing that you'll notice about like the KO and the Neon comp is that, and even the Omen comp, is that they do have quite a bit of utility, but once the utility is used, it's gone, right? Neon throws a stun, stun's gone. Throws a wall to escape, wall's gone. Now you just have your sprint and one more stun, and that's it. Very, very low utility sort of resources for Neon. If you're playing an Omen, maybe you need to fight for this area early. So you throw Paranoia. Paranoia is gone. Then you just have your smokes, which, they're good and they do recover over time. But they're also much more heavy committal to use a smoke than to use a star and turning it into a nebula for a dissipate, right? So the flexibility of Omen is much lower than it is for Astra. That's kind of one of the ways that Fnatic is going to exploit teams, is they're going to offer to trade utility with the other team. And since the other team is trying to fight for space, they're going to take that trade. They're going to offer their own utility. And then Fnatic is going to be like, never mind, we don't actually need to take the space. We'll come back and hit it in 30 seconds. And Fnatic will have a bunch of utility left, and the other team will not have a bunch of utility. So let's go ahead and actually look at an example of this. Fnatic attack side, round number 1 against Team Liquid. Team Liquid brings 3 players to A. They're going to immediately throw a bunch of utility, and they're going to immediately take this space. Boom, flash, dash, run. Cool. Wait, there's nobody there. Where's Fnatic? Oh, look. Fnatic is all in their spawn. They haven't tried to take aggressive space because they know that every team is trying to take aggressive space. Okay, so Fnatic happy to just sit in their spawn. They're making a bit of pressure towards C because Fnatic has a C bias. They want to go C if possible, so they want to create pressure towards C. And you can see that immediately Liquid has to give up the space that they just took on A with all of their utility, and they have to run over to C site because Fnatic has showed pressure there. Fnatic is like, all right, that's fine. We've got 1 minute and 15 seconds left to work with. Liquid has now thrown a full wave of utility. They've also made 2 rotations, and they've left A with a single player who has now used another piece of utility, unprompted, essentially. And now, for the very first time, Fnatic has used a piece of utility. They used a Prowler to clear a rubble, and they're just going to walk out behind their smoke that they can then pick up and throw and use again. And again, they're not really committing into anything. They're going to go ahead and put a turret to scout, which they can also pick up and then move if they want. And there we go. Yampy has now used a flash. So Sky has 0 utility left. KO has 1 flash left. Omen has no smokes left. Viper has 1 molly. Neon has no utility. There's 40 seconds left in the round. Fnatic still has access to Boombot, to Fade Eye, to 3 smokes, to 2 mollies, to a Raise Nade, and Team Liquid has essentially just guns. Team Liquid is now playing Counter-Strike, and Fnatic is playing Valorant. So that's kind of not balanced, right? When you think about it that way. So as we can see, Fnatic kind of like slowly advancing up. They're going to pop the door. They're going to make Liquid think that they're splitting into A site. They put up their Viper wall. They throw an Astra smoke into stairs. And then they just immediately pivot onto B site. And boom, they get a spike plant for free. And they're able to play off their utility at A. And this round is just so difficult for Liquid to win because now they have to retake with almost no utility. All right, so jumping ahead to round 3, we're going to see a very similar setup from Liquid. We can see 3 players right here about to push up and take aggressive space on A, and we'll see if it nets them any value this time around. The round starts, there's a bunch of utility, and Fnatic has thrown a little bit of a wrinkle in. They now are spamming with an Odin to kind of just further, get chip damage and further disincentivize Liquid from pushing forward, just kind of trying to make it harder for them to gather information. They were able to get the Neon all the way up to rubble, but at the same time that this is happening, if we look over on the C site, we're seeing this similar Fnatic default. So there's a smoke here, there's a dissipate here, the Fade Eye gets thrown up here, and just creates pressure. And now Liquid has to make a decision. There's players outside of A, there's players outside of C. which site should we go to try and defend with the vast majority of our resources? And because everybody's very scared of the mound plant on C, they generally will opt to defend C site, and that's what we're about to see. So the players are starting to rotate off of A for Liquid. The KO is leaving. The Neon is starting to leave. And once again, it's going to be just kind of Sky sitting here trying to create some pressure. Another flash is used, but now A is basically open for the taking if Fnatic does want to go that direction. Meanwhile, Fnatic is just playing it very slowly. They do burn a Prowler to check around the mound area before collecting the orb. And then they're just going to go ahead and back off. And the turret is holding space middle. There goes a smoke out from Liquid. So as Fnatic decides to start clearing A, they're going to throw a molly to the backside of Rubble. They have their Viper smoke up, which they can put up and down. They go ahead and clear space with the Fade Eye, but they're really not committed to anything. They've even pushed up towards the B site as well with Durka, who then just create a little bit more pressure using a Boombot, which prompts yet another smoke to be used from Omen. So this is a very key thing that we need to pay attention to. Omen currently has no smokes available, which means that Fnatic is now set up very well to actually go hit a site in the next 15 or 20 seconds when there aren't any smokes to stop them from hitting a choke point. So we're going to see them continue to kind of spread the pressure, spamming at A, gradually grouping up for a C side hit. They start throwing utility. They're probing to see if there's any sort of resistance. And it turns out that there is. And even though they do get a kill at C site, they opt to pivot into a B hit once again. Now, there is an Omen here with the Paranoia, but it's not enough to stop Fnatic, who is flooding through as a team. And it's going to be a very, very easy plant once again for them. And this is basically just going to repeat itself for the entire attack half against Liquid. Let's go ahead and skip towards the end of the season to see another game of Fnatic versus Liquid, where this is now the third time the teams have played. There's clearly been some sort of effect because Liquid has changed their comp. They're now running something much more similar to what Fnatic is running. They're running the Raze instead of the Neon, but they still just can't stop Fnatic on the attack side. So we're going to start the round off, and we can see immediately something different. Fnatic is now dedicating a bunch of players towards A because Liquid has started shutting down the C side of things, and they've also kind of started disrespecting Fnatic's A default that they ran for the first entire game. And so now Fnatic is going with something a little bit more explosive, and they're quickly taking a Rubble. We can see a ton of utility actually being used. We've got the Fade Eye, we've got a Star here, we've got Blast Packs across for the Raze, and we're using a bit more of the Viper wall to get us out here onto the A side of the map. At the same time, we're seeing a very similar look towards C with the Star towards C main. We've got a turret watching B. And as Fnatic takes this A Rubble control, we can see that there's not really a ton of pressure being put towards A site, but there's just a lot of noise being made. Odin spamming each other, lots of emphasis towards the A site from Fnatic, but no real intent to actually go there. But it has done its job because Liquid has to respect the fact that they have seen utility and players towards the A site, so they actually rotate 3 players here. But B has been abandoned for the most part just because they have had to dedicate more resources towards C to shut down what Fnatic had been doing over there. And then they still had to continue to contest the A side of the map. So there's always going to be a hole on Lotus because of the 3 sites and because of how much emphasis you have to put on shutting down both the A and C main areas. So now Fnatic is able to basically just use their huge amount of resources of utility to just feel out the round. And we can see a couple of cool things here. So they immediately Prowler B. They decide, well, maybe we can go B because we didn't contact anything here. Boaster goes ahead and puts a Star over here in case they want to pivot towards C, in which case they can maybe turn this into a gravity well or potentially even just dissipate it as they come through the door and catch somebody off guard who might be trying to defend that. And then they're just immediately going to hit B when their Prowler doesn't actually contact anything. Throughout all of this, they have just created a huge amount of pressure all over the map. And they're in a very, very solid post-plant setup where these C players are very isolated from their team and the players who are trying to get back into B from A are just too late to really get into a good spot. So Boaster's going to find 2 kills on the flank, and Liquid is just immediately going to go into a save at this point. And let's jump forward one more time, because we're going to take a look at a match between EG and Fnatic in the upper finals of Masters Tokyo. So this is probably, I think, the 12th time that Fnatic has shown the map this year. Teams just still don't know how to deal with it. So as you can see, a very, very familiar setup from the Fnatic default. We've got the 2 players here, we've got the 3 players here, we've got the Dissipate Star, we've got the turret holding B, and we are about to see Evil Geniuses get absolutely slapped around by Fnatic's comp. So there's the orb for some A control, and again, we just see Fnatic kind of just falling back, playing very passive towards A. The Dissipate Star catches Boostio off guard. Fnatic gets an immediate kill, and now the round is very difficult for EG to play. But Fnatic is not going to just immediately go ahead and accelerate into C, because there is a smoke. They don't really know what's on the other side of it. They have so much time to work with that they don't need to go too fast at this point. So they're actually going to regroup towards A and just do their due diligence. They still have so much utility to work with that they can explore B site. They're going to go ahead and throw this boom bot, and they're still just holding outside of A to see if there's any further aggression. And we can see that now Fnatic, as they go back and re-explore C, they still have a star on the C site. So Evil Geniuses is still really unsure of what's going on in the round. And what happens when you're unsure is you start to walk for information, especially if you're playing an aggressive comp. Let's just quickly take a look at the amount of info utility that EG has to work with. Their Killjoy is dead, so they have no passive utility from an alarm bot or a turret. And then they just have 1 Sky Flash available because the dog has already been used and the other Sky Flash has been used as well. So the next thing that EG can do to try and figure out what's going on in the round is to just kind of look for information with their bodies, which is going to result in free kills for Fnatic and an even harder round for EG to win. So let's just go ahead and quickly explain the Fnatic default on Lotus, because I think it's pretty basic, but also just extremely effective, especially considering the sort of stylistic relationship between the comp that Fnatic is running and how everybody else is playing the map. So we've got our toxic screen that cuts across kind of like this. We've got our orb that comes out here and creates pressure because of being able to put it up and down. We have our 2 players playing here very, very passively, kind of just accepting the pressure that defenders will put towards Mound, but then just holding this choke point and not losing control of it. And then if they ever do want to come back this direction, all Killjoy has to do is just place a turret through the door, not risking contact of her own body, but basically just using a turret that will recharge or can even just be reclaimed to check this first angle. And then once the angle's clear, they can molly back here or use a Fade Prowler or Eye or something like that as well. So it's very easy for Fnatic to get back out on A after they've lost control of it, but it's very difficult for the defense to continue holding it. Meanwhile, over towards the C site, we're going to have players coming out like this. There's going to be a Fade Eye thrown somewhere on the C site. It's usually up in the elephant, like up in the wall, or it could even just be over the top of Mound, basically just to check to see if anybody's playing in C main. And that's going to be comboed with a Star and Nebula Dissipate to just kind of allow players to swing out here and maybe catch somebody off guard peeking that. And then there's also going to be a Star here, which can be turned into a Gravity Well if they do want to fight this, or it can just be smoked off so that they can come up and collect the orb basically for free. And Fnatic is just going to do this every single round that you let them. There can be a turret placed here to watch mid. Sometimes they will switch it up and they'll only have 1 player towards A spamming with an Odin, and they'll have 1 player back here just kind of holding to see if anybody comes exploring from B. And Fnatic will just hang out in spawn, for 15, 20, 30 seconds at a time. Sometimes they'll go a little bit more aggressive this direction, or as we just saw, they maybe have to do a little bit more aggression towards A, but they're always going to have some sort of combination of a little bit of pressure C, kind of passive information towards B, and then some sort of pressure towards A. And that splitting the attention of the defenders towards both extremity sites makes it almost impossible for them to distribute their players and resources correctly, at which point Fnatic will just kind of group up, use their prowlers to clear space, use their boombot to clear space, and if nobody is sort of resisting them, then they will speed up onto the site. If there is resistance in the form of smokes or counter utility, then they can very easily pivot through doors, or they can just kind of group up and slowly grind their way forward on A, while also still creating pressure towards C with Astra Stars or just their previous movements as well. And it's just so effective against teams that are blowing half of their utility kit in the first 15 seconds of the round to try and take A control, and then immediately giving it up because they just don't have the ability to hold it while also holding the rest of the map.